The old masters like Dürer, Rembrandt or Da Vinci did not have nearly the abundance of drawing media that are available to us today. But nevertheless, or maybe precisely because of that, they left us drawings of great expressive power, which we still admire today. So today I would like to show you how you can make really decorative drawings from quick sketches using just a reed pen, brush and ink. Hello, nice to have you back at Art for Everybody. If you are here for the first time, my name is Evi Steiner-Böhm. I'm an artist from Germany, and I also have two assistants who are called Pedro and Rosa, and they sometimes help me in my videos to explain things so that they are easy to understand. And now, without further ado, let's get going. As always, let's have a look at the material first that I'm going to use. I will make 3 different examples on 3 different colored papers for you. And I have a drawing pad here with relatively strong drawing cardboard. It makes sense to use cardboard like that because I will be working with a brush and I will be working with water. Then I have a reed pen as the basic drawing material. Let me hold it up a bit closer to the camera so you can see what it looks like. It's usually made of reeds or bamboo canes, but of course quill pens or other strong grasses were also used in the past. Then I have a brush with long hairs, with which you can also draw very nicely. But if you don't have one, it doesn't matter. You can also use any other fine brush. The old masters all had brushes made of animal hairs, of course, but I don't use them for animal protection reasons. Then I got 3 different inks here, namely a sepia ink, which was the typical shade that was obtained from cuttlefish. It's a kind of brownish hue. And I have black ink. Black ink was made of soot and was also the most common color. I also have a modern ink, a blue one, because I think I can transfer the old master's way of drawing to our time and use our modern media for this. The difference between Indian ink and ink is that Indian ink is mostly waterproof ink. The dye that is used is made water insoluble with a binder such as acrylic resin. In contrast, ink that is used in schools, for example, is mostly water soluble. The only thing that is standardized is that drawing ink has to be waterproof. I used waterproof inks for all 3 examples because they are easier to draw with. So I'll start with the first motif now. I'll take the sepia ink, put a little bit of it in my lid, and I will now create a typical old master still life. I will use modern motifs, of course. There is nothing wrong with depicting modern things using these old master techniques. I'll start with the pumpkin and I'll just dip my reed pen into this ink and you will see right away that it makes very uneven strokes. That's what gives us this expressive drawing later, that the strokes aren't as even as we know from our modern ink pens. You have to keep dipping the pen because the paint is thick at the beginning, but the longer you draw with it, the thinner the strokes become. Oops, that shouldn't happen. We'll dissolve that afterwards with a brush. Don't worry, that's of course the disadvantage of waterproof ink, that you can't correct it. So I'm just laying out my basic structure now, my 2 onions, and with this style it's completely fine if you stay very sketchy. It doesn't necessarily have to look like the real models. You can invent something or change the whole thing. It's not that important. You can already see that the ink is relatively difficult to get off the reed pen now, and that you need a lot of patience for these fine strokes. So if you don't want to put in so much effort, but still want to make the motif more interesting, you can now also play with dots and lines. For example, you can work now with dots in the shadow areas to make your drawing look more interesting. The same in the bottle. Or you can work with different short or long strokes. If you Google Van Gogh and look at his reed pen drawings, these are real masterpieces of variety between point and line. The pumpkin has warts in it anyway, or small injuries. That's quite nice to use for your design too. On the onions, you can perhaps also indicate bits of onion skin. And when the rough preliminary drawing is finished, then I take the brush. And since the ink is still wet everywhere, I just go over it very carefully with a wet brush. This gives me beautiful, delicate washes. Can you see? Where the line is already dry, it stays put. And now I simply play with these damp areas and get a really great light and shadow effect. If I want, I can now also use the brush to draw details that might be important to me. This works better with a brush than with the reed pen. It's finer and the stroke is not quite as energetic. You have to decide for yourself what you like better. And voila, my first example is finished. So for the second example, I'm going to make this old elderberry bush now. For that, I put black ink into my lid. And it works the same way as just did the still life. What's so attractive about these lines is that they are very clear and very distinct. And the irregular strokes also support the natural look of these branches, which go in all directions. I'm not really sticking to the photograph now. It's just supposed to be an impression of what it could look like. So there are various tricks you can use now in designing that you may have learned in previous videos. Especially with trees, it's always so interesting how you can create the illusion that things are leaning forwards or backwards with semicircles. I'm going to make this branch lean back a bit. and this one too. If you design the bark, you can of course also work a lot with these dots again, because they express the moss on the old trees so beautifully. Here too, you can work with a brush. I don't have to go into great detail now, I just have to indicate the details. In fact, with drawings like this one, the more detailed you do them, the more confusing they get. On the contrary, you rob them of their effect because they live off these strong, irregular strokes. I take the brush now while it's still wet, and I do it like I did with the still life. I darken the tree a bit on one side so that you get the feeling that the light is coming from here. Then I just take what I already have on my paper and just dilute it with water. With these very dark works, you can either use white gouache if you like it, or you can also use white pastel pencils or white chalk pencils for the lights. And you can put the lights in a few places. You just have to be careful that it doesn't smear, so that you can get really nice light dark effects. For the third example, I thought that I would like to interpret my subject a little bit more modern by using blue ink now. Nevertheless, I chose something old as a motif, namely this old door. This is the side entrance door in Amberg at the district office. And I think it's really pretty because you can design it so decoratively with these strokes of different thicknesses. And here too, the drawing doesn't really have to look exactly like the model, but you use the model to get an interesting design. These patterns around the door don't necessarily have to look like those in the picture. We just want to indicate them a bit and make them interesting again with dots and lines. And I leave that more or less unfinished as well, and just let these varied brush strokes and the strokes of the reed pen speak their own language. And so that you can see that these motifs can actually be presented very decoratively, I'll show you the three drawings again in a mount. Here's the still life. Although it was very quickly done and might look a bit untidy, it still has a lot of expression because it has such a beautiful light and shadow effect. Next was our tree, which I've highlighted a bit with white. And That is something that would also fit perfectly into a modern apartment with a lot of white and black. Maybe then with a black frame or a silver and black one, so that it comes into the fore a little better. But it will definitely look good there. The last one is the one with the blue color, which looks a bit more modern. This is also something that actually fits into almost every surrounding, but I personally would tend to put that in a modern apartment. The only thing I would say is a typical country house style would be the still life with the sepia color. But what somebody hangs in their apartment is of course always a very individual matter of taste. And that brings me to the end of this video. As always, thank you for watching. I wish you a lot of fun trying out the different examples, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, have a very good time. Bye bye.